All right, so this is a GitHub project, and it has the developer roadmap, and it's got a purpose up here. So I'll just read this for everyone. The purpose of these roadmaps is to give you an idea about the landscape and to guide you if you are confused about what to learn next, and not to encourage you to pick what is hip or trendy. You should grow some understanding of why one tool would be better suited for some cases than others. And remember, hip and trendy never means best suited for the job. And then they're working on a beginner's roadmap. Because this is, again, I'm talking about this now, there's going to be quite a bit in here. So I don't know if anyone's seen this site before. It's been around and been in development for a while, I think. But seen some iterations of it, but I recently shared it with my team, and I thought it would be good to kind of review here as well. So, when you're first starting off, you talk about either being a front end or if you're interviewing or whatever, you talk about these different roles, and they don't say full stack here, but full stack, to different people is going to mean different things. But you can kind of entail that means front end, back end, and at least some DevOps portion of it as well. So this is broken out, and it starts off with this intro here, which is telling you that for any path you choose, whether it's front end, back end, or DevOps, these are going to be what's required, just some basic understanding of these fundamentals. So Git being version control, and basic terminal usage, data structures and algorithms, GitHub, and they have licenses listed here. And I was mentioning that in reality today we don't deal with too much licensing anymore. That was, I think if you're in the Microsoft world, you're still probably dealing with licensing. If you're in Oracle, licensing, et cetera, or, Visual Studio, or I think we have, licensing for DB-Viz, but a lot of us have actually moved beyond, we're using VS Code, we're using all these open source, everything, Docker, this, that, not too many licenses to handle anymore. Semantic versioning, major, minor, patch, SSH, how to remote onto a machine, or execute remote commands, HTTP and HTTPS and APIs. Again, we're all pretty familiar with that, but those are all concepts that you'd have to learn. Design patterns and character encodings, right? So then it goes into what is the front-end roadmap, and they have the key up here. So purple is their personal recommendations. Green is also a prominent pick, and then green would just, or gray check mark would just be other, and then you'll see gray boxes in here where they're just saying they don't recommend that you necessarily learn those. So they're options, but certainly not some of the more prominent ones. So obviously, when you're coming in and you want to be a front end developer, there was the one video, I don't know if anybody watched it, that was we recently posted, and she mentioned they're at a party and somebody says, I know HTML, can I be a web developer? And years and years and years ago, right, that was like true. You just need to know some HTML and CSS, and that was enough to be a web developer. You could update the static content and you could replace it on the web servers, and that was it. And then maybe learn some JavaScript as well. So it was some of those core things, right? You need to know understand what the internet is, HTTP, browsers, etc. Know the basics of DNS and what are domain names and what is hosting, how to get hosting beyond MySpace. And then you need to know the basics of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And JavaScript in itself, as we opened up their discussion here, we were talking about Netscape and IE and how the challenges were that the two browsers were kind of at war in building out what JavaScript functionality might be supported at the time. Today, that's more encapsulated, and this is going to cover some of the different libraries. So you need to know version control systems. Today, that's really only Git, but for those of you who remember, not too long ago, we were not using Git, and we were using Subversion or Visual Source Safe, or can't think of another one now. Team City or whatever. There was a couple of different ones. CVS, yeah. But yeah, today it's really Git or some variant of Git. So GitHub, GitLab, and obviously we're using Bitbucket. So too bad that one's grayed out. They don't recommend that one. Web security knowledge. Obviously, that's very clear today with cores, Chrome. Those are things that we're still learning and kind of tackling, or at least myself. So that's something that you have to know and learn. Package managers. A lot of us are using NPM now. There's other package managers, Yarn, and I believe I can't remember the .NET package manager now. And then you need to know CSS architectures, processes, preprocessors, right? And then I guess less is gone. See, I don't work on front end enough anymore, so I didn't even know that was no longer popular. So sad. Build tools. So for building your front end, right? A lot of people have had experience with Gulp. Now you run npm scripts, and then linters as well. For everyone on Node and JavaScript side, we're using ES linters. Now we're using TypeScript linters and other linters as well. And there's pretty much linters for everything. There's YAML linters and JSON linters, I believe. I don't know. I'm just guessing now at that, but module, bundles, Webpack, picking frameworks, right? We looked it up. I thought Vue had surpassed. Looks like Vue is kind of trending down. So React is still #1. Angular is #2 on the Google Trends. Vue is down at #3. So modern CSS, styled components. I didn't know. Anybody have experience with styled JSX? I haven't. I still haven't looked that up. I don't know what that is. I don't know if that's something that anybody's used. No, sounds like no. Web components, HTML templates, Shadow DOM. I'm not familiar with what Shadow DOM is. CSS frameworks. So Bootstrap used to be really popular. Material, UI. So some of these are still here. Tailwind, CSS. I don't know if we're using any of our CSS frameworks. So we have the CNVR, right? Testing frameworks. A lot of people have used Jest, and now we're pretty much using Cypress, right? I don't know if anyone has experience with Enzyme. There's the older frameworks here: Mocha, Jasmine, Chai. A lot of people had experience with those as well. Type checkers, so we're using TypeScript now. Well, that's for backend though. So I guess you could use it for front end as well. Progressive web apps. So some people are using WebSockets, some are not. But there's local storage, some other things you have to learn there. And server-side rendering. So I guess Next.js. I thought Next.js was more Angular focused, but I guess they have it here on the React dotted line there. Some of the teams here are using Next.js, right? And then GraphQL, some people have played around with that. Static site generators. I know some people have played around with a couple of these. Uger had done a test with the Gatsby.js. He liked that one. And Hugo, I believe. Then mobile applications. I don't think anybody here is really doing anything mobile apps. So some of these are more optional or future for your career path if you're going that route. Desktop applications. If you're not familiar, Electron's pretty powerful. There's a lot of apps that you may have used that you didn't know are based on Electron. So that's the front end. Does everyone clear on that? Everyone's got their front end down. There'll be a quiz on this later to make sure you know absolutely everything here. Backend roadmap. So if you're full stack, then you're going to continue on learning here. If you're just backend, then this is where you start, assuming again you know your basics with Git and HTML and internet and domains and hosting again. But now we need to add in OS general knowledge, right? So now you're going to deal more with memory management, communication, process communication, and I/O management. Threads and concurrency. So these are big things, and with Node you might think about that less, but you still you get the benefit of Node being asynchronous there. process management, how many processes you're running, terminal usage. And now we're in Docker, so some of that's kind of a little bit of abstracted, but still there. Learning languages, so now you're beyond your React and Angular and JavaScript, and now you're learning for frameworks there, but these are the languages. So PHP is still around, still pretty popular for, I think Facebook's still PHP, C#, Java, Rust, and Go, and JavaScript, and Python and Ruby. So we're JavaScript, Java, and that's it. Some people have experience with Python. I don't know if anybody has experience with Rust or Go or Ruby. Version control system. So we mentioned some of the older ones. And then you're going to need experience with relational databases. Today, pretty much that's popular. The most popular now is probably PostgreSQL. Earlier it would have been MySQL or SQL Server probably were the two most common, plus Oracle. And then it's got the NoSQL databases listed up here. I think it's got Elastic in another spot, but it's because it's search-based more. And then more about databases, database replication. So, backend is inclusive of learning about your databases and optimizing them, as that's on this side here. And then, of course, then there's ORMs, object relational mappers. If you're on the node side, then we're often using Connects, Bookshelf with or Objection.js now. And I think Hibernate is a popular one on the Java side. And indexes. So you're just tuning your databases and queries. And then of course APIs. There's HadeOS, and if you don't know what that is, it's worth taking a look at. But it's a very strict or stricter rule of RESTful APIs. So we sort of practice that, but we don't practice it 100%. They have SOAP up here. This was I don't know if a lot of people that have been in the industry for a while, that was the de facto API language, the syntax, is SOAP-based APIs. But that's certainly gone away. gRPC, I think some people are using that for some things. Authentication. So you need to worry about authentication now on your, to your backend services, whether that's going to be cookie-based, OAuth, token-based. Please don't make it basic auth. JWTs, JSON Web Tokens, right? SAML still very popular. Then you're going into caching. So you need to know and understand caching. And I think the team was given an example of for CIA and for the auth now. It's and even when it was on CAP, every call that you make is in the Redis cache, so that it doesn't have to do the full lookups. It's a quick cache lookup instead. And you can also consider client-side caching or CDN as well. And then your web security knowledge, again, HTTPS and cores. And there's places where MD5 is acceptable, I think, but you pretty much do not want to use it for anything secure, for securing, for cracking attempts. Testing, so your testing frameworks for your backend, you're going to have integration testing, unit testing, and functional testing. So you need to understand what those are, the differences between those. I'd like to nominate somebody for doing a whole Friday learning session just about the testing framework or testing types. You need to understand what CICD is and what the difference is between the two. I think we practice it in a lot of cases, but not full CD in many cases. Design and development principles. So a lot of people are familiar with KISS. Somebody give a shout out. What does KISS stand for?
Keep it simple, stupid.
Thank you.
Knights in Satan's Service, if you're from the 70s.
There you go. And then a lot of people are familiar with DRY. So what is DRY?
Don't repeat yourself.
Yep. And then I had to look up Yagni, which I didn't know what it was, and actually know. Oh yeah, you aren't going to need it. So don't build more than you need to. In my opinion, it's kind of along the lines of keep it simple, stupid, but maybe more so just don't build more than you need. And then SOLID is an acronym for a series of principles. I'm not going to get into all those. There's a lot of them there. And test-driven development, I was talking about this as well. If a lot of people have tried it. A lot of people don't practice it. And in my opinion, I think if you go the route of the CICD, it's somewhat conflicting because you're supposed to write your tests before you do your development. But if you get too far ahead, in my opinion, if you get too far ahead in your writing of your tests, then you're not pushing your code. And if you do, then you're pushing tests that aren't passing yet and breaking the build. So it kind of could defeat that purpose there. Search engines. So this is where they've placed Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch, is certainly a search engine, but it's also a NoSQL database. Architectural patterns. So a lot of us are very familiar with monolithic application architecture, and then obviously now as we've gone toward microservice architectures and microservices, I think we're all pretty familiar with these now. Service-oriented architecture, serverless, so that'd be more Lambda, right? And CQRS, I forget now what the CQRS stands. This is like a message queues, right? Or is this what's CQRS? Anybody know?
The command and query responsibility segregation. One handles the command, another one. Basically, right. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Command query response segregation. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, and that's typically with message queues, right? But is that right?
It's like pretty much it's with the message queue, but it's more around the event database where you're capturing all the events, and event aggregator will give you the consolidated view of like what all events, like a ledger system, right? Like you put in all these transactions and then you make a query, and the event handler will kind of consolidate everything and give you the final state of what it needs to be.
Got it. Then of course we all need to learn message brokers. Specifically, we're using Kafka for a lot of our systems. And previous to Kafka, very popular was RabbitMQ. Everyone's got their message queues. Microsoft's got message queues, and AWS has two separate message queues available as well. And then containerization versus virtualization. So one winner here, right? Docker, and we're all using Docker. So we're all familiar with that. There's GraphQL. I don't know if anybody here is using GraphQL or graph databases, but obviously those are available and applicable when needed. WebSockets.
GraphQL?
Yeah, go ahead.
Is it like a database, or is like a query language for the REST?
As I understand, it's a query language. It's similar to it appears similar to a query language, or for like a database, because you're querying against what you can map to APIs and potentially to databases. And
yeah, it's like a mesh database. Pretty much, you have references to everything, so it's pretty much like a mesh. And you run queries, you can get the full object structure from anywhere to anywhere.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the true benefits for it, and Abhishek, maybe you can elaborate as well, is for mobile applications where you might be requesting data, but you only want to you know all the data that you want, but you don't want to retrieve the whole structure, right? You can request specifically what you need.
Yeah, and I think another thing is the correlation. Like I generally think of it from the perspective of when you have like a lot of data points talking to each other, and you want to look at from the perspective of one object versus the other. It builds that correlation, like, okay, these are the users for these categories. And if you go to the category, it will also give you the list of all the users that are in that category. So you can complete that picture of category and user relationship from either angle.
Yeah, I was under the impression that GraphQL isn't really directly related to graph databases. And I forget the name of some of the query languages that like something like Neo4j uses, but because that's like it has like edges and nodes, and it's all about the relationships of different objects. Whereas like the GraphQL was a thing that was created by Facebook for like ease of API. So it's like more of the consumer defines the object that it wants. Like it's a JSON object that it wants the API endpoint to return to it.
I agree. I don't think that I think this path here is just like a backend developer path. I don't think that GraphQL is necessarily linked to graph databases here. I agree with you.
Yeah,
I think it's just like parsing that data. If you are going to make a query on the graph data, it's going to be a huge structure. So GraphQL gives you that flexibility. You can have different responses with just, you control the predicates, right? Like what's going to come back in a way.
Right.
So
yeah.
I think they just built a tool on a query language to deal with such a complex mesh database in a way. That's my understanding. I'm not 100% sure though.
Yeah, I thought like they kind of, because they have the whole like social graph concept at Facebook, and so I think they were playing off of that, and not as much of a like underlying. Well, I mean, I'm sure that's how they actually have a lot of their data stored. So maybe there is sort of a connection in some ways, but it's not what I believe you would query a graph database with generally.
So continuing your backend journey, similar front end had WebSockets, and backend equivalently need to understand WebSocket technology, and then web servers. Call out was that even if you're doing front end to Angular, you're typically serving that up in Nginx. So you have to, even if you're front end, you're still probably learning some Nginx, at least just a basic level to serve up your static site, static content. And then people are using Apache, people are using other things. If you're on the Microsoft side, there was IIS. On Node side, we're typically using Express. There's some other options out there, Fastify and a couple others. And then mitigation strategies, so throttling, bread crusher, just understanding some different things there. Where did they have? Oh, I guess it must not be here. So backend doesn't even cover load balancers yet. So we still have one more. We are almost up on time, so we're going to cover DevOps really quick. So again, everything else that you need to know from Git and HTML and this and that, and you might need a programming language, probably need a programming language of some sort. And then now you're going to understand more OS concepts here. Again, process management, threads, concurrency, iOS, probably more on the virtualization side now, more on the file systems side, and more networking concepts than you would have previously as well. And then let's see, operating systems. So now you're going to have your Linux flavors. Typically, we're in CentOS or some variant of Linux as well. So a lot of us are basing our containers off of Alpine images. There are use cases where you're using CentOS or Ubuntu. And then let's see, Windows, of course, Unix, and then learning to live in the terminal. So you're on a Mac or you're SSHing into machines, or obviously that's what you're using as a terminal. So getting familiar with more this on the DevOps side, you're going to be a lot more involved with your bash scripting. There's a lot of different commands in here that it's mentioning: awk, sed, grep, psh, top, networking. There's a good old trace route, nmaps, dig. So these are all pretty common commands. I don't use all of them on a daily basis, but I've used a lot of these in different instances. So you're going to certainly pick up a lot of that. Networking, so understanding email, SMTP, HTTP, FTP, your SSL and TLS, SSH, and port forwarding. Then right is and how to set up a reverse proxy, forward proxy caching server. So, we're using traffic, and so when we're using traffic, that's our reverse proxy. There's a load balancer in front of that as well. But so there's traffic itself is also doing load balancing. Docker's doing load balancing. So we actually have a lot of layers of load balancing. Web servers, IaaS, Nginx. So some of this was mentioned up above. Infrastructure as code. I was pointing out that we don't use any service mesh because with Docker and traffic, we have our own, I should say Docker Swarm and traffic. We have our own service discovery, so we don't need that. Docker we're using for containers, configuration management. We have not been any, the sysadmin, syseng teams, I should say, use Puppet. I think they were using Chef and Salt, but I think they're consolidated back now to Puppet. Container orchestration, obviously we're using Docker Swarm. Everyone's heard of Kubernetes as well. Infrastructure provisioning. So this is going to be, for cloud infrastructure provisioning, that's Terraform and CloudFormation. CloudFormation, I think, is AWS specific. And let me get rid of that. Not now. CICD tools. So we are using Bamboo internally, but some people have had experience with Jenkins. Circle CI is pretty popular. GitLab CI, Travis CI. Some of those are pretty popular. If you're on the Microsoft side, you're going to be using probably TeamCity. Monitoring software. So we just had the talk yesterday about different monitoring software. So there's monitoring your infrastructure. They've got Prometheus here. People have used Nagios before. That's an older one. Grafana is mentioned here. Zabbix was also mentioned. Teams have used Datadog, tested it out. We're not using it now. Application monitoring. Here's New Relic called out here. Some people have used Jaeger. I don't know if anyone else has had experience with some of these other ones. Log management. This is where Elastic gets put in, along with Splunk, Graylog. I've used these top three. I haven't used Papertrail before. And cloud design patterns, availability, management, monitoring, design and implementation. So there's a lot here as well. I know we're up on time, but I wanted to go through all of these. They got cloud providers. Everyone's heard of AWS. There's the Google's and Microsoft's Azure. Heroku is still up here and popular. They don't recommend the Alibaba Cloud. I don't know what the split is between this and this. DigitalOcean is also up there with the cloud providers. I don't know what these others are, Linode or Vultr. I don't know if anybody has experience with those. That's it. Those are the three paths, and if you're a full stack, you're expected to know all of this. So there'll be quizzes on this, before the end of the day.
Right. Right. Check your inboxes. The quizzes are in your inboxes. Fill them out.
Is it open book? Hopefully it's open book.
It's always open book.
The answer key is open source.
Yeah, we're all cheaters.
Can we do it as a team?
Stack Overflow.
The link's out there though, so you can feel free to check that out. That was back there in the announcement for today. Some more fun ones. Try to share it. Has anyone seen that site before? Has anyone gone through that?
No.
Or repo, I should say. It's a repo. GitHub repo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
I'm
trying to find where. It was actually super high up there. It's got 170,000 stars. So it's a very, very popular GitHub repo. I don't know what that places it. It places it in the top 100 for sure. But.
Wow.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone. Have a good weekend.
Ryan.
This was
Thank you, Ryan.
No problem. See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
You guys. Thanks, Ryan.
Ryan.